Hello and welcome back. In the last video, we finished implementing the interpolation state for our weapon, and we have the ability now to pick up an item, and that item will fly up in front of the camera for a brief moment before falling back down. And in this video, we're going to add to that by making the item shrink as it's falling down just before we swap the weapon. So we're going to be affecting the scale of the object. And we're going to be using another curve to do this. So let's go ahead and add another variable to our item class called item scale curve. So here we are in item.h, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of our private variables section. And just at the bottom, I'm going to add another curve, and this will be a u curve float. So u curve float. That's a pointer, and I'm going to call this item scale curve. Now this is going to have a uProperty macro, and for the macro specifiers, I'm going to make this edit defaults only. We only want to be able to edit this from the default blueprint, and it'll be blueprint read only. And of course, we need the category. I'm going to put that in item properties and give it, as usual, the meta specifier allow private access equals true. For the comment for this, this will be the curve used to scale the item when interping. So curve used to scale the item when interping. And now we have a curve. So we're going to actually create this curve in the editor. So I'll hop back in the editor. And here in the editor, I'll go to _game and select our curves folder. Here we have item z curve. We're going to create another curve. So right click and in miscellaneous choose curve, and it'll be a curve float, and we're going to go ahead and click select, and I'm going to call this one item scale curve. So there's our curve. So I'm going to double click to open this, and we can go ahead and add a couple of keys to this. Now I'm going to start off at a value of 1. So as I right click and click add key, I'll have this key selected, and at time 0 I'll have a value of 1, and that's because I want the item to start off with a scale of 1. I don't want it to be scaled down at all at that point. Now I'm going to add another point, so right click and add key, and for this I'm going to put it at about 0.6 seconds. I'm also going to keep this at a scale of 1. So it's basically going to keep its scale value at the normal value of 1, and then going from 0.6 to 0.7, it's going to start scaling down. So I'm going to add another key, and this will be at 0.7, and this is going to be where it really starts to shrink down. I'm going to put it at a scale of 0.1, so 10% of its normal scale. Now let's take a look at the item z curve, and we'll see that the item flies up and hovers about the camera interp location all the way up to about 0.6, and then it drops off. So at 0.6 seconds, it falls down off the screen, and that's when, in our item scale curve, it actually starts to shrink. So it's shrinking as it falls down off the screen. Now I can make this a smooth curve by selecting the points, right-clicking, and selecting auto, and now you'll see that it's a very rounded curve, and we can grab these handles and affect the way that, that the roundness on the curve behaves. So as we're testing it out, we can tweak the curve if we want to. I'm going to go ahead and save the curve, and now we can jump back into Visual Studio. So here in Visual Studio, I'm back in the item interp function. And here is where I'm going to set that scale of the item. So way down here at the very bottom, I'm going to create a const float local variable, and this will be the curve value for the scale curve. So I'm going to say scale curve value and set that equal to item scale curve, and I'm going to get float value, passing in the elapsed time. Now, of course, this is a pointer. We need to make sure that we're not dereferencing a null pointer. So we're going to make an if check for item scale curve before we do this. That way, if item scale curve is not set, then we will not attempt to access a null member. Okay, so we're getting our scale curve value, and now all we need to do is scale the actor by the scale curve value. So I'm going to say set actor scale 3D, and this will be an F vector. And the F vector can have its X, Y, and Z values all equal to scale curve value, because scale curve value is going to be 1 all the way up until about 0.6 seconds, at which point it'll drop down to 0.1 at the end of the curve. And it's as simple as that. As soon as we're finished interping, it's going to be at a scale value of 0.1. It'll be 10% its original size. And for that reason, we're going to want to set its scale back to normal in the finish interping function. When it's done interping, we need to set it back to a scale of 1. So let's go up to finish interping. And here, just after our if check to check for character, we can set actor scale 3D, and we can use an F vector with 1.f, and that will set the X, Y, and Z values all to a scale value of 1. So let's say set scale back to normal. Okay, we can go ahead and compile this, and then we'll give it a test in the editor. Okay, so here in the editor, we're going to set item scale curve to our item scale curve asset that we created. And we can play test this. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up an item. And things happen so quickly that it's almost impossible to tell whether or not our item is being scaled. So what we can do is we can change the length of time of our timer and our curve. So why don't we go ahead and try that? Now recall in the item class, we have this float called zCurveTime, and it's edit defaults only, so we can change that from within the editor. So in our weapons folder in base weapon, we can open base weapon BP and search for the curve time. Here it is, zCurveTime, and we'll see that we've got 0.7 for our curve time. Now, we can stretch this out so it takes much longer than 0.7 seconds to finish our interpolation timer. For example, we could choose a value of, say, 3 seconds. Now, since we're using item zCurve, we're going to be updating our item's Z location very rapidly. So if we want, we can come into our curves folder and we can duplicate item zCurve, and we can call this item zCurve slow. And we can open item zCurve slow, and we can set these to values of time that are longer, more extended. So why don't we do that? So instead of going from a time of 0 to, say, 0.7 seconds, we can place our final curve time at 3 seconds. And then we can stretch this out so that it takes 3 seconds total rather than 0.7. So I can just take this point here and drag it, and I can take this point over here and drag it, and take this point over here and drag it, and so now we have this hump that's takes longer for the item to traverse, and then it hovers from 1.5 seconds to 2.5 seconds, and then it dips down from, we can put this at 2.5 seconds to 3 seconds. So if we're going to use this curve for the Z location, then we're going to want another curve for the item scale curve. So let's right click on this, duplicate it, and call this one item scale curve slow. And if we open this one, we can take our final key here and stick this at a time of 3 seconds. And this second key here, we can place it at a value of 2.5. And if we zoom out, we'll see that the scale here will remain roughly 1 until 2.5 seconds, at which point it'll start to drop down. Now everything will happen slower. And in base weapon BP, we just have to make sure we're using these curves. So for item Z curve, we're going to use item Z curve slow. And for item scale curve, we're going to use item scale curve slow. So we can compile that and we can go ahead and test this out again by picking up an item, and here it's happening very, very slowly. And you might have missed it, but it did scale down, it looked like. In fact, we can even take item scale curve slow, and we can start to scale the item down even before it starts to fall, like say 2 seconds. And if we want to, we can right click and use a break here so that we can alter the handles one at a time. And if I alter this handle, well, then we'll see that we can drop off on the scale a little bit more rapidly. Let's go ahead and play test this again and pick up an item. And there we saw that the scale dropped off really, really quickly. And it looks kind of funny shrinking down like that. So we're going to put it back to 2.5. And in that way, it won't start shrinking until it starts dropping. So let's do this one more time. And we could pretty clearly see that the item scaled down as it was dropping. So those are a couple of curves that we can use to slow things down and make sure that our gameplay mechanics are working. So let's go back to base weapon BP and replace item Z curve slow with just item Z curve. That's the one that spans 0.7 seconds rather than 3 seconds. And for item scale curve, let's replace item scale curve slow with item scale curve. And of course, we need our Z curve time to be 0.7 seconds because this has to correspond to our curve time. So now we can compile and save that. And if we give this a play test, we'll see that things are happening more rapidly, which is what we intended. Okay, that's going to conclude this video. And to recap, we added another curve, and we called this item scale curve. And this is a float curve that affects our item's scale. And we use this curve value in our item.cpp file. At the bottom of our item interp function, we use that value to call set actor scale 3D, and we scale our actor by the scale curve value. Okay, that will conclude our item interping state. We now have our state complete and we're ready to move on in this course. In the next video, we're going to work on retargeting animations so that we can go and get different animations that didn't come with Bellica, and we'll use those in our project. Stay tuned.